Hi, everyone. My name is Cory. I am the writer, director, producer of a new film called Superhuman, The Invisible Made Visible. It is a film about consciousness, about the power of the human mind over matter, over our physical reality. It is extremely empowering, very entertaining, and I wanted to find the top-notch experts in their field to be in my film. And of course, one of them is Dr. Eben Alexander, who is a neurosurgeon from Harvard Medical School. He's the author of Proof of Heaven and Living in a Mindful Universe, among other things. He's doing so much work on consciousness, and that's what I love about him. I'm talking about saying him, and you're here. Dr. Alexander, welcome. So good to see you.
Well, Caroline, thanks so much for having me on. It's great to be here today.
What I love, speaking with you, is that, you are trained as a medical doctor in mainstream science, but your incredible near-death experience is, for those who don't know, I would love for you to just briefly tell us a little bit about that story, but also how that got you into the field of consciousness, which is entirely outside the medical field. But before we do that, I just wanted to say, for the folks who are just joining right now, we are broadcasting on several Facebook platforms, YouTube platforms. So wherever you are right now, please feel free to leave a comment and questions. And we have Michael with us today. Michael, say hello.
Hey, Caroline. Hello, Dr. Alexander. Thanks for joining us today.
Hello, Michael.
Everyone around the world that's watching.
Yeah, so please feel free to read the comments and to make sure you write your questions for later on, because we are going to address them at that time. Okay, yes. Going back to you, Dr. Alexander, if I would love to quickly hear again how your near-death experience happened and how that changed your model of reality.
Okay, well, first I would go back to your opening comments and point out that consciousness is actually a very deep and profound part of medicine, and certainly of neurosurgery and neuroscience. But I just never realized how deep an issue it was. I mean, all of our kind of witnessing of reality is something that we need to realize we're only witnessing the inside of our own consciousness. And the more we kind of assume that the reality that we perceive is absolutely rock solid, the reality that exists out there fundamentally, no, that's not necessarily the case. It gets far more interesting than that. Now, as you pointed out in the introduction, when I had my near-death experience, it was due to a severe case of gram-negative bacterial meningitis. It was a case that put me in coma for a week. When you review the medical records, it's a case that by all rights should have killed me or left me maimed for life. And I think that's one of the things that gets the medical profession extremely excited about my case, is that I ended up over 2 months having a full recovery. And I really have not found in searching the medical literature any other cases like that of this kind of meningitis where the patient ended up having a full recovery. But that, of course, is part of the deeper story. I had spent the first 54 years of my life honing a very conventional scientific worldview. As you pointed out earlier, I'd spent 15 years as an associate professor of neurosurgery at Harvard Medical School, thought I had some idea of how brain, mind, and consciousness are all linked and how they work, but I could not have been further from the truth. And that's what my coma journey showed me in 2008. And the best thing about it was the medical details of my illness, which have recently been put out in a medical case report available for anyone with medical training to interpret. It came out in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases in September of 2018. And anyone who wants to look at that case report can get to it on my website, ebenalexander.com. If they go to my blog postings for September 2018, in the third paragraph, there's a link right to that case report. And the thing that gets your attention, if you know anything about medicine, is the documented damage to my neocortex should have gotten rid of any but the most rudimentary forms of conscious awareness. And yet what I experienced was a far more real, robust, vibrant, alive, memorable, and meaningful set of experiences than anything I've ever been through in my life. And all at a time when my neocortex, the part of the brain that modern neuroscience says is responsible for the details of conscious awareness, was effectively dismantled. So yes, it called into question everything I ever thought I'd known about the nature of consciousness. That extraordinary spiritual journey that I had is described fully in my book, Proof of Heaven, and I expand on it in the later books, Map of Heaven, and then our most recent book, Living in a Mindful Universe. And people who want to know more can go to ebenalexander.com, and there's a tremendous amount of information there, a reading list, and much more about my history to help anyone who's interested. But to the medical field, what is so shocking is that I could come back from this, and in fact, come back completely. And that just brings up the profound power of kind of healing that we have available to us. And I'd say one of the most important aspects of my journey and of my healing is that it opens up our beliefs and our willingness to see possible pathways forward for all of our healing. Now, the medical profession has acknowledged mind over matter for decades through our admission of the reality of placebo effect. And placebo is not just, your sugar pill curing your headache, but in fact, tremendous amounts of healing have happened by people's beliefs that can be the case. And that, I think, is what is most exciting about a lot of this awakening to consciousness and our understanding of it. But the point of fact for me is just that extraordinary experience that I had that I remember today as if it just happened yesterday. That's typical of near-death experiences. And in fact, to get that case report published, the peer reviewers were asking the 3 doctors who wrote the case report on my medical records, who were not involved in my care, but were fascinated by my recovery. They asked them, how do you explain this miraculous recovery? And what they said was the NDE. Because they were aware of other cases where people had a very threatening, lethal illness, and yet they came back and ended up having tremendous healing, which often happens after a profound NDE. And it has to do with acknowledging the spiritual nature of our being and our spiritual essence. And this is all about things like power of prayer and about our higher soul having free will to manifest the world of our dreams. But what we have to realize is that our conventional materialist science has been very bleak and dismissive of so much of these profound truths. And we need to know that our standard cultural response to some of these beliefs, is kind of woo-woo and not supported by modern science, is false. They're very, very supported by modern science because of the miraculous healing that we can see in these kind of cases. So I think that's where, for example, Living in a Mindful Universe is such a powerful book, because it helps to bring this truth and the power of our beliefs and kind of the power we all have to manifest the world of our dreams to the fore.
And you guys need to really read the whole story. I mean, how it happened and what you saw on the other side. I don't want to spoil it because I want people to just go and get the book, because the details are extraordinary. How you reconnected, with other members and things like that.
Right.
So I really would love it if you're not familiar with that story, please take the time to do that. Because I also think when you tell a story like this, people start to kind of relate to it, even though they didn't go through an NDE, but maybe they connected with the other world in that way, or they saw themselves there or something like that. So I think it will trigger their own awakening to something else. So that's why I think absolutely people should familiarize yourself with that whole journey. Don't you think?
Well, I think so. But the important thing to point out is that there are millions of souls on this world today who have witnessed what I have witnessed. I mean, so my journey just lines up with theirs. The reason the scientific community takes mine so seriously simply has to do with the fact that there was such well-documented damage to my neocortex. And even though I went from a 10% chance of survival at the beginning of that week in coma down to a 2% by the end of the week, my doctors agreed that if I was in that 2% survivor category, there was no chance of my coming back. They thought I would spend a few months, in a nursing home, and then I would just die from the illness. So that's where my story garners tremendous attention from the scientific community. But the reality is my story is very much like many other thousands of cases that I'm aware of people that I have talked with, people who've been to my presentations, or who have contacted me by email, or just, pulled me aside on the street or what have you. But the commonalities of these stories are what are so striking, and it crosses all cultures, all continents. What people discuss might be influenced by their prior belief systems, like their religious beliefs, and yet the content of these experiences is often radically, refreshingly new and uninfluenced. For example, I had pretty conventional beliefs growing up in a Methodist church in North Carolina. And yet my near-death experience came away showing me without any doubt the reality not only of the afterlife and of that infinitely powerful God force, but also that we come back again and again, that reincarnation is very real. And I didn't realize that there was a tremendous amount of scientific basis, 6 decades of study at the University of Virginia, more than 2,500 cases of past life memories in children, where the best explanation is actually of reincarnation. I had no notion of that before my coma, and yet that was something that when I came out of my NDE, I knew to be a fact of existence. So no, these are not just your religious beliefs presented to you in some exotic setting when you almost die. It's the universe opening up to us about some deep and profound truths. And the interesting thing is when we start to really study these, when you study near-death experiences across all cultures, across continents, across millennia, you start to realize the commonalities show some very profound and deep truths that in some ways might align with religions, although I will say not with any of the superficial religious orthodoxy, but only with the deep meditative truths of unification, of love, of kindness, and compassion and mercy. Because any of the conflicting messages that come out of religious orthodoxy, from my point of view, are added on by humans trying to control other humans. The deep mystical truths or meditative truths of all the great faiths really agree on this oneness, this infinite God force. And again, it's not just God or Allah or Brahman or Vishnu, Jehovah. This is a very profound and deep, very real source of our very intelligence and awareness. This God force of pure love. And that's the real gift that NDEs bring back to this world.
Yeah, and actually, which brings me to the next question, but it's kind of a double question. Have you done any research or have you looked into not just NDE, but other types of experiences like out-of-body experiences? You don't have to be, in a hospital or sick or in a coma. Have you done any research, and do you see any correlation? And then I'll tell you my next question.
Well, yes. Well, in fact, Living in a Mindful Universe, our third book, goes into great detail about every bit of that, because, you will never, ever prove the reality of the afterlife based on near-death experiences alone, period. I mean, after all, they didn't die. Now, that's not to take away from the fact that anybody who studies NDEs will be shocked and amazed at the similarities of the stories, no matter what the medical circumstance that puts them there. And also, I will point out there's a whole other category of what are called shared death experiences, which happen to people who are normally healthy, physiologically normal. They might be a loved one at the bedside. They might be a loved one 1,000 miles away from a dying person. But the reality is a shared death experience, the bystander soul goes along, witnesses all the same things that a near-death experiencer would experience, even when the dying soul is actually leaving. So they're not having an NDE, they're having a death experience. But the shared death experience is of a soul that will come back, and they report the very same things that people often report with an NDE. Now, to get back to your question, though, as a neuroscientist, what I had to do and this is what we did in Living in a Mindful Universe in that third book, is go into great detail about all of the scientific evidence for non-local consciousness. That is what would normally be called psi phenomena or parapsychological. It's really a wrong use of our language to call it the paranormal or parapsychology, or to talk about, the spiritual versus the material, or the natural versus supernatural. Because in fact, if you consider consciousness a part of the natural world, then you've got to consider all this part of the natural world. None of it is supernatural at all. It's just showing us the broader manifestations and behaviors of consciousness and what we have access to as human beings. But in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, for example, we went into great detail studying things like remote viewing,
Right.
psychic spy programs, which are absolutely essential, scientifically, statistically validated beyond any reasonable doubt whatsoever. So remote viewing is one example. Out-of-body experiences have been studied scientifically. Also things like just intuition and kind of a sense of knowing at a distance through intuition. Yeah, exactly. Remote healing also, right. Distance healing is a very powerful effect that you find in medicine, where people can influence the health of others through centering prayer and other modes of focusing on a certain outcome. Psychokinesis, the ability of mind to manipulate physical matter at a distance, is also something that's been scientifically studied. Just one go-to source for everybody on this stuff, go to uvadops.org. That's the University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies, uvadops.org. And there's a wealth of scientifically validated information on the afterlife, on all these phenomena of non-local consciousness. They've written some of the most profound scientific books on these topics. And from my point of view, in Living in a Mindful Universe, we took not only all of this evidence for non-local consciousness, and that includes near-death experiences, shared death experiences, past life memories in children suggestive of reincarnation. Every bit of this is a gigantic body of scientific knowledge to help us get to some deeper answers. But the first thing it does is it dismisses the materialist model that I used to believe before my coma. Brain creates consciousness, nothing exists but the physical world, and it throws it out the window because that model of reality is false. It doesn't fit any of the data at all. We need much bigger theaters of explanation. The other important thing I'd point out is that this whole question of mind, body, physical reality is deeply, deeply tied in with the mysteries underlying quantum physics, and specifically the measurement paradox and what is known as contextuality, which is the influence of mind and mental choice of the experimenter on what is revealed in quantum physics experiments. But you end up coming away just as the founding fathers of quantum physics did, like Werner Heisenberg,
Schrodinger,
Erwin Schrodinger, John von Neumann, Eugene Wigner, and others. Very profound realization that mind or consciousness seems to be fundamental in the universe. And that is something that is absolutely being proven to the nth degree by those who study consciousness. And now there are still some involved in quantum physics who say, wait a minute, quantum physics has nothing to do with consciousness. But that's only because they don't realize what all is going on in the world of consciousness studies and what is necessary to explain all this. But for example, some of those physicists who believe consciousness is unrelated to all this are perfectly happy with infinite parallel universes unfolding at every choice point. No, that is not the answer, even though it fits the math and physics. But who can make any sense of that in living a life as a human being? When you realize that the quantum physics is actually just showing us the primacy of consciousness in the universe, then all of this other discussion starts to make sense.
So you through the NDE, I love that. I mean, this is incredible. And the more you mention scientific papers and research that's been done, the more validation you bring. So I love that. So through the NDE, you went somewhere and you came back. Yes. So where did you go? What is your model of reality? Like, okay, here's the physical world. This is what we see. This is what we observe. then there's this other reality. Like, where is it?
Well,
How does it fit? How
what
does
it
it
is,
all work
what it
together?
is we have there's several different realms that are available to us, and there is this material realm, and it has a physical reality that is out there. And yet, one of the deep lessons of quantum physics is that there is no such thing as an independent, objective physical universe independent of the observing mind.
Okay.
That is, you can't get around it. It's absolutely a stunner. That there's no way to interpret this physical world without realizing that your interpretation is heavily colored because of your kind of mental experience of it. But in fact, this mental aspect of us has access to multiple different realms. And the lowest and densest of these realms is this material world. But even if we're existing in these bodies in this material world, we can have transient access to some of those higher levels that exist in more what I would call spiritual realms. And for example, we encounter them in dreams. In fact, the dream world is filled with a lot of the same kind of information and potential that can teach us things that are applicable in this world. Likewise, I would say the use of certain Entheogen drugs, sometimes called psychedelics. One word I can't stand because it's a false word is hallucinogen. They are not hallucinogens. Yes, they are showing us alternate versions of reality in spiritual realms. Entheogen is a far better word. It basically means putting the spirit into us via a plant substance. But it's simply opening a door, a window into kind of higher vibrational realities that we can access. The important thing to understand, though, is, for example, an NDE is not murky and mystical, dreamlike, kind of ephemeral. You know, many people think that. They think, oh, the NDE is very kind of murky. And no, this world is the murky kind of world. That world is absolutely rock solid real. That's why so many come back from those experiences, and those memories last for decades, if not a century or more. I mean, I've had people come up to me and say, I've never told anybody this before, and then share with me either near death or shared death or an after death communication that might have happened to them 50 or 60 years ago. And they remember it as sharply and crisply as if it just happened yesterday.
But where is it? But where is the other world? So you said different realms, but like, okay, so this is the realm, and then is the other realm contained or outside?
No,
or
what I would say to answer your question is that, for one thing, you have to realize that this material world, as much as we like to think of this as, you know, existing out there separate from us, it's not. It's a mental map. In fact, Karen and I discuss in our book, Living in Mindful Universe, and a very important concept that we call the supreme illusion. And that is that although we're used to sitting around in this world and looking out upon it and kind of listening and using our senses to construct this model, never ever forget that what you're actually witnessing is a mental model being put together in your mind that is supposed to be a faithful representation of something that is out there. It just turns out the something that is out there is far more than just the physical world. And even the physical world is not something that can be viewed as independent of my mental realm. And so it's always mental realm. And that's why meditation, centering prayer, going within, these are all techniques of starting to explore more richly all that is available out there. And
so the way you're saying, like the stars and the planets are only in our consciousness, they not
only exist in consciousness. But very important to point out, this is not just about, quote, human consciousness. Humans borrow this property from the universe. That is, there's something called a mental layer. And for those more interested in the science and the quantum physics, I would steer you to the scientific journal Nature in 2005. Go to a one-page essay by Richard Conn Henry. It's called Mental Universe. He explains it very clearly, and he was the head of astrophysics at Johns Hopkins University, so absolutely no slouch in understanding the impact of quantum physics and cosmology and how we should come to a deeper understanding of it. But he makes it very clear there that we live in what is primarily a mental universe. That is, there are causal factors that originate in that mental layer. That's why things like placebo effect actually work. is we're coming at it from a mental layer, which is more primordial. That is more kind of part of the origination of everything emerging into this world, comes from that mental layer of the universe. And that is where all this gets very exciting. And you start to realize that we can't take any of it for granted as being the ground being, what's called the ontological primitive in philosophy, other than to say that consciousness is that ontological primitive. But it's not the material world. And that's where so many of us think, well, it's only the material world. And of course, in our scientific training as a physician, I was trained to think, well, it's all just interactions of molecules and, subatomic particles, atoms, molecules, and you build it all up from the small stuff. But there's actually tremendous evidence, especially in quantum physics, that you really have to look down to a top-down ordering of causality. Now, there's some, even involved in quantum physics, who still get stuck thinking, oh, if we understand the little electrons and photons and protons, quarks, what have you, and we build it all up from there, that explains our emergent world. Well, no, because in fact, that all that does is give you many possible universes, and there you have to invoke the many worlds interpretation, for example, of quantum physics, where every conscious observation necessitates a new universe. If you really want to pay attention to the way the model is unfolding with consciousness as primary, it's called objective idealism. Another synonym for that would be metaphysical idealism, analytical idealism, ontological idealism, but they're really all talking about the same thing, and that is the primary mental layer of the universe. And I'd say from a quantum physics standpoint, I would refer you to the writings of George F.R. Ellis. He's a South African mathematician. He's written extensively about top-down causal principles that allow for kind of a mental universe. David Bohm and his implicate-explicate order explanation also referred to kind of a mental pilot wave. So it's really just the different ways of understanding this. The most current, I would say, best explanation from my point of view for people who really want to follow the quantum physics lead into all of this about consciousness is just look at the relational interpretation of Carlo Rovelli. He's done a beautiful job, an Italian physicist, and also the metaphysical interpretation of that through Bernardo Kastrup. Bernardo is one of the endorsers of our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, and Bernardo has written some very, very beautiful exposés lately in Scientific American.
Oops. Is he frozen? Is he frozen? You still see the stream?
Oh, he just froze.
Okay, all right. So since he's frozen, let me go ahead and show a clip then of him in the movie, so we can, and then we'll continue. It's like fascinating. And I remember when I interviewed Eben, he was exactly like this. I mean, this guy is an encyclopedia. He is so brilliant at bringing together this different aspects of one subject that we were talking about. So much research, he's done so much, he brings so much information. So let me go ahead and I think we lost him. Let me go ahead and share the screen and show you one of the clips where we have Dr. Alexander. So here we go.
I finished my neurosurgical training at Duke in 1987, and then I started work at Harvard Medical School after doing a fellowship in cerebrovascular neurosurgery, all along thinking I understood something about brain, mind, and consciousness. But that, of course, was the tremendous gift of my near-death experience, is finding out that what I thought was a worldview that we just assumed to be true is actually false, that consciousness is primordial. All of this emergent reality basically emerges from consciousness. And it opens the door to a tremendous amount of understanding about consciousness and the mind and the power that human beings have over their unfolding reality. The purpose in so many ways of existence is to know thyself. The self-awareness of the universe, this profound quality of awareness, of conscious awareness of existence, is inherent in the universe itself.
Okay, guys, what did you think? I think we lost him. Are we back on track? Can you all hear me and see me? So the name of the movie, you guys, for those who are just joining, is Superhuman, the Invisible Made Visible. You can see the poster right behind me, and we're gonna post a link for you to find it. And so Dr. Alexander, you know, the reason why I wanted him in the film, first of all, like I said, he's an encyclopedia, but also because he's had his own near-death experience, being out of body, seeing that consciousness is primordial, not the other way around. Too bad we lost him right now, because I was going to start asking him questions about the brain itself. So in the movie, we don't just talk about remote viewing, just like what he mentions. We talk about also tapping into these worlds, being able to do remote viewing, being able to move an object with your consciousness, with your mind, being able to see even blindfolded. I really want to get his take on this. What is the brain doing so that you are actually able to see with the blindfolds on? So hopefully he'll be back. But in the meantime, so my question is, you know, how is it possible for the consciousness to bypass the physical brain, to basically tell the physical brain what to do when you want to do it, such as, like I said in the film, you know, the ability to directly command an object to move? How does that work, you know? And so for those who have not seen the film, I so highly recommend that you see it. First of all, it's entertaining. It's not, you know, it's scientific, but it's not kind of boring and rehashing the same old stuff. We do live on-camera experiments, you know, to show how it's possible, the connection between the two, mind and matter. So, but let me stop here. Hopefully, Dr. Alexander will be back. So, Michael, do we have any questions in the meantime until we hear back from Dr. Alexander?
We do. First of all, thank you to everyone in the UK, Germany, France, Norway, New Zealand, United States, Italy, Belgium, and the Netherlands. We truly have a global audience today. So many people were inspired by his books, and I wanted to share some of those comments with him. I sent another guest invite link to his email, so hopefully he can jump back on.
Yeah.
But I do have a couple questions here, and I'm hoping we can at least get your take on it. Some of them were meant for both of you, but Caroline, in your opinion, speaking of higher vibrational realities, how many different realms are there?
Yeah, so that's why I love to talk to different scholars and professionals and professors and researchers on the subject, because they all have their perspective. And of course, Dr. Alexander started telling us about the different worlds, but like, how are the worlds organized? Where are the worlds? You know, of course, scientists talk to us about, you know, parallel universes. So Like, how many parallel universes do we just keep going? And what are they doing, you know? So for me, it doesn't really work this way. For those who don't know my work, actually, I talk about this in my book, The Divine Plan, Beyond Now and Beyond 2250. But the way I see reality working is slightly different. So, of course, to me, consciousness is fundamental. It is fundamental to all of existence. So consciousness manifests or emerges as one of the ways that it can emerge is as a physical world. Another way it can emerge is as a pure consciousness. Another way it can emerge is as intelligent life. So that is the reason why I think it is at the base of all of existence. And so you are then consciousness manifested as an intelligent being, as an intelligent life. And then you have the ability to also integrate within the aspect of consciousness, which manifested as a physical world. So it's consciousness within consciousness within consciousness, if that makes sense. But as you do that, this is only one aspect of you that is doing that. The rest of you is still consciousness, and it still remains connected with everything else, which is all of existence. So now, what is all of existence? So, you know, then, I mean, this is a very long, complex conversation. This is why I recommend that you go and read the book, because it's fascinating. So when you come in, when the aspect of you that is consciousness comes in the physical world, you are now subject to certain laws. I mean, certain rules. I don't like to say laws as if they're limited. They are sort of limitations, because it's like you're inside a game. You don't stop being everywhere else, but for this part of you is now playing this game. So what are the rules of the game? The rules of this game is you get to see this much, you get to hear this much, you have to function within those parameters, and that becomes your physical experience. But the idea is to know how to master both, because you're still outside, you're still the universal you and the physical you. So the idea is to know how to merge the two and go back and forth, so that you are operating within the system, the physical system, while bringing higher intelligence and higher knowledge from the outside system. You know, you have to understand the planetary grid, how it's mapped, how it's a map of reality which matches your human geometry. It's a long conversation, but just to give you an idea, that to me it's not just realms this way. Like, you know, you raise your consciousness and you go higher and higher in spectrum and abilities. It's more inside out, outside in, because you are both. You are both inside the physical and outside the physical. And that is the mastery. And the outside the physical is infinite. It is everything. It is the multiverse. It is everything. That's why you can tap into the intelligence of the universe while at the same time being inside the physical realm. Does that make sense? Hopefully that was the question they asked. What else, Michael?
Now, I know that you researched this person. Do you know if Dr. Alexander's NDE experience supports the teachings of Abraham Hicks?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I can't speak for him, but that was going to be like one of my questions. And I don't remember. Well, actually, you saw the purpose of the universe. I asked him, so if that's the case, so what is the purpose? Like, what are you here to do? So Abraham Hicks is based on the idea that you're here to have a joyful experience, pretty much. I mean, you know, there is no specific thing like karma or something you have to suffer, all that stuff. So in a nutshell, anyway. So I think from what he said in the film and what he had told me before, I think the purpose for him is to thrive and to tap into this universal, to this higher consciousness layers of reality. So if it's specifically Oh, here he is. Yay, we have him back. I'm speaking for you, so I'm going to stop. And all right, so we got him back. We're going to ask him this question. But I think I would love to move now to the subject of the brain and the special abilities. So let me bring him back. Here you are. What happened? Did you I know you guys had a storm.
Yeah, we had a tremendous storm Thursday evening that interrupted another webinar, and we didn't even have power back until 9 p.m. the following night. So it took them 28 hours, and they're still trying to fix it all up. And I guess the internet got nicked briefly. We're back.
Yeah, we're back. Yeah. Anyway, I was entertaining people, and also I showed them a clip of you in the film. By the way, what did you think? Now, so you were in the film Superhuman, the invisible made visible. It's all about consciousness, but it's also about the connection between the two, the interaction of consciousness and the physical world. What did you think of the movie?
Well, I liked it. I think you did a very good job. I think you got a lot of interesting people. You put it together in kind of a fascinating storyline. So I really liked, what the final product of your work. So I'm hoping a lot of people will look at it and pay a lot of attention to it, because there is absolutely a tremendous revolution going on in the scientific world now that has implications for all of us. And it's...
Oh, no. Oh, no, don't go. I think we lost him again.
That as much as we don't think that that's the way things normally work, but in near-death experiences, there's tremendous overlap of kind of conscious awareness, like in a life review, where we essentially experience the impact of our actions and even thoughts on others from their perspective, from their emotional truth during our life review. And it's how Karen and I often say the golden rule, treat others as you would like to be treated, is written into the very fabric of the universe through that life review that goes back thousands of years and near-death experiences from all different cultures. That life review is a very common feature, but it really shows that the boundaries of self in many ways are part of a fiction to support this drama that is our lives unfolding.
So one of the reasons why I made this film, first of all, because I personally have had experiences since I was 5 years old. So I know, I used to hear people's thoughts. I would look at them and I know exactly what's wrong with them and what was going to happen to them the next day. I could see what was happening in the other room. So to me, I lived and I do live what I talk about. But so it was important. So I know it's real, and working with thousands of people around the world, teaching and training, they do the same thing. I'm not the only one. And so that's why I know this is real, from the perspective of not that just consciousness is fundamental, but consciousness can or even supersedes even the physical world, in the sense that you can have the experience that you want. So that's really why I wanted to make the film, but also bring as much scientific validation as possible.
Right.
You, my dear, you are particularly fast. First of all, you're an encyclopedia. I mean, you've done so much work, so much research, you know so much, you've experienced so much. But what I want to ask you, being a neurosurgeon, so what part of the brain, first of all, two questions. How much of the brain do we really know? and then, what part of the brain do you think is responsible for people to have those special abilities, to go out of body, to see remote viewing, to do telekinesis? What do you think?
Well, I think that all of us have those abilities. I mean, I think that is kind of the biggest lesson that's coming out of all this, is that our beliefs can be very confining, and especially our societal beliefs are very falsely restricting. And people like you have kind of known this forever, because I would say you have a, quote, thin veil. And in fact, if you talk to Joe McMoneagle, who's one of the most renowned remote viewers in the United States intelligence program, he will tell you that, yes, everybody has these abilities, but he'll also point out that some of the more successful remote viewers that he knows of had kind of challenging childhoods. They
Mm.
had things that happened to them that were rough events. And it's because of these rough events that they would learn to do things like dissociate, like split their consciousness into more than one module so they could kind of bilocate and things like that. So I think that there are all kinds of scenarios that can lead to someone having a thin veil. I think, for one thing, being a very old soul, having had multiple incarnations here, really kind of knowing the rules and knowing that big, deep, powerful truth that we come back again and again, even though there is this program forgetting that is supposed to prevent us from carrying that kind of knowledge into adulthood. Like Jim Tucker and Dr. Ian Stevenson, that did all the work at UVA looking at past life memories in children, as they'll tell you, you need to harvest those memories before age 5 or 6. Because after that, they're covered over naturally. If you look at the whole world of transpersonal psychology, the work of Stan Groff, Michael Newton, Brian Weiss, and others, that basically the whole idea behind that is, given that we're much more than just, a psyche living in a body that's birth to death and nothing else, but we're much more than that. And transpersonal psychology simply reflects that by doing past life regressions, life between life regressions, hypnotic regressions, things like that, doing centering prayer, other forms of meditation, to get to this knowledge and to get beyond those boundaries of the programmed forgetting is a way of kind of coming into our higher self. But people like you are born with this. And I would say that is part and parcel of being a soul that's been here many a time. And you come back knowing that you can extend that kind of knowing across the veil into your adult life. And so you can take advantage of it. And people like me, yes, I had spent most of my life believing that conventional worldview that in many ways my beliefs wouldn't allow for some of this. And yet when I had my NDE, everything opened up completely. When I came back to this world, I was still very fragile, very much kind of on the edge, one foot in this world, one foot in the other. For 6 months, I had a lot of microelectronics effects that are commonly described in near-death experiences. Things like the street lights would shut out when I'd walk under them. I had to go through 3 watches before I found one that worked. My computer would crash all the time, which I thought was just a problem with Apple's infrastructure. I didn't realize at first that those are common effects after an NDE. And now for me, that stuff was pretty heavy for about 6 months. Then it seemed to kind of lighten up. But I have not developed, as I know some people who've had NDEs, and afterwards they can see auras, they can see spirit forms, orbs, things like that, in their normal waking consciousness in the material world. I can see all that in my meditations, but I still don't see it in this when I'm actively engaging in this consensus reality we call the material world. And yet I think that's where so much of the potential, human potential that you demonstrate in your movie comes to the fore. And it's important for all of us to realize that placebo effect and kind of miraculous healing from diseases like cancer or advanced infections, that's something the medical profession has accepted for a long time, for decades, as an example of mind over matter. But of course, if we can influence our health that much, that's really just the beginning, because there's much more in this world that we can influence by realizing that this mental layer has tremendous power to kind of affect the world. And it begins with our health and with the health of loved ones. That's why prayer can be such a powerful effector. And for anyone who wants more of the scientific data on that, I would steer you to Dr. Larry Dossey's wonderful book, Healing Words, where he talks a lot about the scientific assessment of prayer and how powerful it can be.
Okay, but from your experience or your research, have you been able to localize that that experience, in the sense that, even though of course consciousness is unbound, but do you think it's related to a part of the brain? Is there, because I'm working with other scientists, they want to know what is the brain doing in order to get to that experience, whether it's remote viewing or telekinesis or speaking.
Well, it's actually, what's happening is the brain is getting out of the way. And I'll give you a very solid example of that. And it comes in the form of scientific research looking at the brains of people under the influence of what are called serotonin 2A type entheogens. As I said, some people use the word psychedelics. I think entheogen is a much better word. But these are drugs like psilocybin, magic mushrooms, DMT, dimethyltryptamine, the active principle in ayahuasca, also LSD, um, and other similar related drugs. These are all very powerful effectors of the serotonin 2A receptors in the neocortex. And it's interesting that by simply interacting, the neocortex is the outer surface of the brain. If you looked at my brain inside my skull, that outer surface is the neocortex. That's a part that makes us human. It's the part that is most recently evolved. Modern neuroscience would try and pretend that all the details of conscious awareness must be constructed within some part of that neocortex. Now, that doesn't mean that other parts of the brain going all the way down into the ancient lower brainstem are not also involved in this phenomenon of consciousness. But in terms of all the details of what we see, what we hear, what we think, our linguistics, our perception of body and space, and our perception of the world around us, every bit of that is put together in that neocortex. And that's why my illness was such a beautiful model for human death, because my neocortex was what was actively dismantled by the infection. But getting back to my point right now, it turns out that in these scientific papers that look at people under the influence of those particular plant medicines or substances, LSD, DMT, psilocybin, etc., they find that functional MRI or magnetoencephalography, which are two very great ways of demonstrating, neural activity in the brain, that in fact, in multiple studies, what you show is when people are on those drugs having profound, phenomenal experiences that might be some of the most memorable experiences they've ever had, the brain goes dark. There's no part of the brain that gets more active. In fact, the whole brain is shutting down.
Sorry to interrupt you. There's no part of the brain that is active?
There's no part of the brain that is more active than in a resting baseline state. That's the important point.
Wow.
So you and I right now have much more active parts of our brain than we would if we were under the influence of those particular substances, where you can basically show that the brain goes dark. And in fact, that came out from a paper by Robin Carhart Harris, Imperial College of London, 2012, looking at psilocybin. That paper is actually in the bibliography of Proof of Heaven, even though the textual reference to it was stripped out by editors before we got that far. There have been other replicative studies since then. A group in Brazil looking at DMT, the active principle in ayahuasca, again found the brain goes dark. More recent work from Carhart Harris, Imperial College of London, showed that with LSD, one of the most powerful such substances, they use magnetoencephalography and functional MRI, and both of them showed the same thing. The brain's getting out of the way. And this is something we discuss in detail in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe. We talk about all of those studies, and we talk about how not only is consciousness not produced by the brain, but it's filtered in. This primordial consciousness is allowed in by the brain. But we also talk about how memories are not stored in the brain. For me, that was crystal clear from my experience. When I came back to this world, I had no memories of my life before. I had no words, no language, nothing. When I woke up on day 7 of coma in the ICU bed, all I knew was where I had been. That fantastic, ultra-real spiritual journey that I describe in great detail in that book, to multiple layers of consciousness, all the way out to the core realm, infinite inky blackness, and a pure oneness with that God force throughout all of eternity and all of infinity. And none of this makes any sense using our little language, which is good for describing a trip to Disney World, but not so good at describing those kind of journeys. But it turns out when I came back to this world, I didn't even recognize loved ones at the bedside, my mother, my sisters, my sons. I had no idea who these beings were. And yet language came back very quickly, over hours, over a few days. A lot of my childhood memories, all of that was coming back. Over 2 months, everything came back. In fact, shock of all shocks, I realized based on conversations with close family and friends about topics of my distant early life, after that 2-month recovery compared to before my coma, that the memories were more complete after the coma. And we
Wow.
have all of that in the book, in Living in a Mindful Universe. There's an appendix devoted to memories not being stored in the brain. And of course, when you realize all the scientific evidence for past life memories in children suggestive of reincarnation, and all that is the work of Ian Stevenson, Dr. Jim Tucker, again, all available at uvadops.org. You start to realize, well, of course, memories aren't stored in the brain. How could they be if those memories are preserved between lifetimes? And again, it takes us back to the point where you were asking me earlier, where is all this happening? Well, we have to first recognize that all that where around us in the physical world is not really as it appears. It all still depends heavily on the mental layer for its expression. And
so the question then, again, like we try to demonstrate in the film, we're obsessed, the society is obsessed with superheroes. Why? It's almost like we want Batman, we want, all the, Superman to like, we have this ideal of these beings or state of consciousness, and we think that it's only special people who can do this. So we're always looking outside ourselves. And so because I've had those experiences myself since hundreds and thousands of people around the world, I know that this is an innate ability, and it's not something outside of us that we can actually cultivate if we know how. Right. So in your case, you said when you came back from the coma, you didn't have something extra, like you couldn't see aura or anything like that. But do you think, now that you know this model of have your new model of reality, do you think that anybody can learn this, or is it only memory? Is there a way to shift your consciousness so that you can enhance this physical experience and have your consciousness make you move an object, see through a wall, do remote viewing?
I believe that these are all human potential that have been investigated and that are within the realm of our possibility. We have to realize that we're mainly limited by our beliefs. And the more that we can question those and then kind of test the grounds out beyond those beliefs. I mean, for me, healing is something that I would say is absolutely kind of a superhuman power. Right. That was part of my recovery package.
Right.
I mean, it's part of what I went through, what I did, what I experienced, what I manifested in coming back to this world. Even though it's important to point out, this is not about the ego and its little will to do this or that. In fact, Karen and I often are teaching people in our meditation play shops to recognize that little voice in our head, the voice of our ego, is little more than an annoying roommate. That's what Michael Singer calls that voice in our head in his book, The Untethered Soul. And I think that's a beautiful way to put it. This is much more about kind of identifying with our higher soul, with that inner observer. And when I say inner, it's actually part of the universe. So don't be misled into thinking it's only inside my teeny little mind. No, your inner observer is actually the awareness that you share with the universe. And this is what you can develop. So when I go into meditation, I meditate an hour or two a day. I use sacred acoustics, binaural beat brain entrainment, very powerful. Anybody who wants to learn more about that, go to sacredacoustics.com. And I'll point out that Karen Newell, the co-author of my third book, Living in a Mindful Universe, and also my life partner, is also the co-founder of Sacred Acoustics. So a little disclosure there. But I use it every day because it's very powerful. And we talk in Living in a Mindful Universe how powerful such meditations have been for me in defining my path forward. But really, I use those meditations in many different ways, but it's to discern more about this relationship of brain and mind and consciousness, and more to explore the possibilities for free will and its manifestation. And for me, whenever I'm talking about sacred acoustics and brainwave entrainment and meditation, I'm really talking about a very profound mode of centering prayer. For me, this is always about returning to that oneness of mind, of consciousness, of that infinitely healing God force at the core of all reality. It's at the core of all of our conscious awareness. So we're never really separate from that, even though our modern culture tries to pretend that, that God force, that infinitely healing force of love is something that's separate and kind of up in the clouds. Well, no way. It's absolutely part of our very conscious awareness, and we can develop our relationship with that observer. The observer is what acknowledges the little silly voice in the head, the annoying roommate, the ego voice, but it also can set you free by developing this relationship of higher soul, realizing that so much, for example, when I have a conflict with another person, I do higher soul to higher soul communications,
Yes.
meditation to help in kind of healing all of that, bringing it all to a win-win situation.
Yeah.
And it's really just a whole new way of looking at things that I think can be very liberating and refreshing, and also tremendously empowering once you start to see how much it can influence your own life and help in your own healing and the healing of others, and really kind of bringing the life of your dreams into your life.
So it sounds like, from what you're saying, it doesn't matter what the methodology is. You do meditation, other people do different kinds of meditation or focusing, whether it's healing or a special ability. The idea is to get the brain out of the way, meaning
and get your little ego voice out of the way.
Exactly.
The little ego uses fear and anxiety and sits there and tells you, questions you, you're doing it wrong, you're doing it wrong. No, put the little ego voice into time out.
Yeah,
and just believe and trust in the universe, and that's what leads you forward.
Exactly. And so once you're perfectly quiet and the mind is completely, you said dark, but it's probably very, very quiet.
The brain is what's going dark, not the mind.
Yeah, the brain. But I want to ask you about something that we demonstrated in the film, which is the blindfolds. Now, when you first look at it, you go, there's no way. This is fake. They're cheating. And maybe some people are cheating. But I wanted to investigate it, and I did. And I do it myself. I traded it myself. And so I know that, and even scientifically in the film, we demonstrated that there's no light whatsoever in the mask, meaning without light, we're not supposed to see. And yet, people from all over, kids, adults, can train themselves to eventually see completely blindfolded. And again, for those who are worried about it, we showed it scientifically that it wasn't a fake. But the question to you, so is this just belief? Or
belief opens the door to a very real ability. So
how does this work for you? How does this work?
Well, let me give you another example, just to get right. Let's get right back to the hardcore of this. There's a beautiful book written by Ken Ring. Ken Ring is one of the kind of grandfathers of the field of near-death studies. And he wrote a book called Mindsight. And in this book, he discusses a number of cases of people who were blind from birth.
Right.
They've never seen anything in their life. They have a near-death experience. And in the near-death experience, they see things around them. They see things that, just like in other near-death experiences, people's brains can be deeply inactivated, and that can be medically documented. That they're dead, their brain is dead, no blood flow, etc., and yet they can perceive things and know things and remember things that they shouldn't have any kind of perception of, according to modern conventional science. But the reality is they can. And so in Mindsight, this beautiful book talks about people who have never seen anything at all in their physical bodies with their physical eyes ever since birth, and yet through an NDE, which is an opening into this kind of higher mindset and kind of higher soul, where you have access to all kinds of information. They can witness things, describe them beautifully, and then come back to this world. They're still blind. Their body and their eyes have never seen anything, and yet, because of what happens in an NDE, and that can also happen in a profound spiritual experience, in meditation, in centering prayer, in a spontaneous epiphany, in an after-death communication. There are many, 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 many ways that humans kind of have what I would say the blinders. We're blind, actually, when we have our seeing eyes and can look around. And it's when we actually obliterate that sense of vision that we can see. It's fascinating, the kind of paradoxical nature of it, and yet that is what we are coming to learn, is this mind. I mean, like in remote viewing, how do you explain how psychic spies can
Yeah.
see the things they see halfway around the world or halfway across the solar system? For example, one of the remote viewers in the US program was able to see the rings of Jupiter
Yeah.
6 months before, 6 years before the Voyager spacecraft went by and saw the rings of Jupiter.
I do that
So,
all the time. I see
and
things
so
before.
there
Yeah.
you have it. So we need to learn to trust ourselves more. And there are certainly people like you who've had these skills since birth. And the more we can all learn together and practice this and question our beliefs, the more we can prove the reality of this kind of power of the one mind. And we all have access to that.
I think everybody can do this. And I think that's the point of the film, is to show so many people doing so many different things and to understand exactly what you're saying, that we are consciousness that is just expressing a part of us in the physical apparatus. But let's see if there, because we have so many people asking so many questions. Let's just take a break here for a second and see. Michael, do we have any questions for Dr. Alexander?
The two of you actually caught the last three questions that I had, so I thought that was interesting. Someone wanted to know what part of the brain you use when you have the blindfolds on to see, quote unquote, or have vision. Maybe the answer is none. There's no part of the brain.
The correct answer is no part of the brain is doing that.
Well, let me say something though, because I am working with some scientists who are specifically doing that, like doing the EEG, putting the EEG sets, doing QEEG, but also MRIs, and also, so it's like I know of 3 different folks who are trying to figure out is there is one part of the brain that gets activated. And so they're seeing patterns. They're not, I don't know if we're seeing.
Well, there's a very important point to make here, and that is, yes, look in the brain. The brain is fascinating, and ultimately we'll want to know what's going on in the brain. But I will stress an analogy here. If I study every bit of the screen of my computer so that I fully understand how the screen of my computer works, that's like studying the brain. So yeah, you'll figure out a lot of things, but you're not going to figure out the content of what is presented there.
Exactly.
You have to go to the CPU. You have to go to deeper levels. And likewise, studying the brain, great. You're studying the display on the computer, but you're not even going to find something as simple as memory in the physical brain. You will not. So you have to be looking deeper for the causal effects of all this. It's not, the brain is the final endpoint of the display system, but no, when you get to all the deeper, more profound kind of truths of relationships, of things like life reviews, of kind of soul journey, the big aspects of our being and growth, you have to look into those mental realms, which are far beyond the physical.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the idea is sometimes we want to think very linearly that, oh, if we pinpoint the part of the brain that's doing that, so maybe we can activate that part of the brain again in order to have the ability.
Well, there are many people who've led down that pathway, and it's a false pathway. They see correlations and they say, well, it's because we see this in this part of the brain that it's happening, as opposed to realizing that when you see that happening in that part of the brain, it's only an effect of the mental, things like
The consciousness of the person. So even if you go and you shoot a bunch of people, their brain exactly in that point, are they going to be able to see blindfolded? Are they going to be able to do remote viewing? That's the question. And I think what you're saying is no, because it's the subjective consciousness.
Well, it's the consciousness that's actually determining the content of what appears to you. It's not something that's originating in the brain.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, what else, Michael? Do you have more? I mean, there's tons of questions and comments. I want to make sure people have all the links also to follow up after this conversation. So, okay, so is there another relevant question right now?
There's one. I'm gonna put a couple of them together. What would would you both say to someone that suggests that this could just be a dream state, or this could be an imagination and not necessarily a real experience when you have an NDE?
That's a beautiful question. And what I will point out about that is, first of all, that's why I think medical scientists took my case so seriously, because an advanced should have killed me case of bacterial meningitis. And if you read that case report, you'll realize it's a meningoencephalitis that was just deadly. I mean, the features of my Glasgow Coma Scale are enough. And especially when you correlate them with what I experienced, I should have experienced nothing. Or at most just a tiny trickle of a very dim form of consciousness, if all of our models of brain creates consciousness in conventional neuroscience were true. So the fact that I experienced far, far more realistic, much more vibrant, much more multi-layered, much more kind of outside of here, now, time, and space. I mean, an extraordinary reality that's as fresh in my memory today as if it happened yesterday, and yet it happened back in November 2012. This is all evidence of something that's not being generated by the brain at all. And this is why it's important to point out the cases I talked about earlier, the scientific studies, functional MRI and magnetoencephalography, looking at people under the influence of those Entheogen drugs or plant medicines, very powerful, that you find no part of the brain that has an increase in activity above baseline. Everything is going dark. And in fact, one of the early studies there from Imperial College London, they used a visual analog scale to measure how extensive and transcendent and otherworldly and kind of extraordinary the phenomenal experience was. And they found a correlation between the extent of, oh my God, experience and the amount the brain was darkened and turned down. So it's not being caused by any place in the brain at all. It's getting the brain out of the way that allows it to happen. That's why near-death experiences occur. The first thing you do when you die is you get your physical brain out of the way. And yet, a quote I love that I've heard from several near-death experiencers is, "I never felt more alive than when I died." It should show you our consciousness is something that is liberated from the shackles of the brain, from the prison that we normally live in. That's why meditation and centering prayer are so important, because they're ways of getting out of that prison in this lifetime, as are the many, many ways that we can explore consciousness through these kinds of meditations, sacred acoustics, what have you, which has been, those kind of binaural beats have been shown to enhance remote viewing, enhance out-of-body experiences. So the various mechanisms we have for taking the brain out of the way. And one other thing I'll point out just in passing here is that many of these techniques involve a slow left-right oscillation in the lower brainstem. That's exactly what sacred acoustics is doing. It was a phenomenon discovered by Richard Heinrich Dove in the mid 1800s, and he found that slow oscillation by using differential frequency sound to the two ears, you create this oscillation in the lower brainstem. Likewise, when people use a pendulum for hypnosis, you're using midbrain circuits to get a slow left-right oscillation. I think that's what's common in these techniques. With PTSD, which is often treated with something called EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, is a way to get rid of post-traumatic memories. And again, it's using oscillations in the lower brainstem. So there's something about these meditative techniques, like with sacred acoustic sounds and with these other kind of hypnotic techniques, that is causing oscillation in the lower brainstem that somehow is kind of liberating conscious awareness. And that's what I've found to be so effective in my meditations, to get back into my NDE, to recover not just memories from that, but to revisit and develop relationships with the beings and entities and with that infinite healing force of love at the core of my NDE.
And it's the same thing when we're talking about special abilities, because you have to quiet the mind to a point of, like what you're saying, the brain getting out of the way. And then you can just, through your intention, when the intention is aligned with your higher consciousness. So I want to do this, but from the heart. And that is what triggers, the remote viewing or whatever. experience. So basically, whether it's NDE or learning these special abilities, we're basically saying the same thing. The brain needs to get out of the way through meditation, through total quiet.
Correct.
So that makes perfect sense. So I think this has been incredible. I am just blown away by the amount of work you've done in the field also, and the research and all the knowledge that you bring. So all of these comments and the questions will stay, and we can always, you guys, if we didn't get to your question, then we'll go back and try to answer them as much as possible. But in the meantime, Dr. Alexander, where can people go to follow your latest work? Because I know Proof of Heaven is about the story of your experience, but what is the latest thing that you're up to?
Well, first of all, I would steer people to ebenalexander.com. That's EBEN Alexander.com. That's the website where my reading list, my blogs, there's a tremendous amount of information there, a lot of links to interviews and to presentations, things like that. So that's an excellent starting point. And also, especially in this era of the COVID pandemic and all the challenges it brings to the world, my partner Karen Newell and I have started something called UnitedInHopeAndHealing.com. So one big word, UnitedInHopeAndHealing.com. Strongly encourage people to go there. We've had some wonderful interviews with friends of ours who are deeply involved in this research. People like Dr. Pim van Lommel, the Dutch cardiologist who wrote the famous Lancet paper on near-death experiences in cardiac arrest patients, and also a beautiful book, Consciousness Beyond Life. Dr. Anna Yusum, we've done a course with her teaching healthcare practitioners to help use meditative techniques, especially sacred acoustics. We've talked with a number of other people, Raymond Moody, Anita Morjani. There are plenty of kind of greatest hits people there. So UnitedInHopeAndHealing.com, go to the replays. You'll learn a tremendous amount. And then also, I think you all have a link you can put up for a course that we're offering through the Shift Network. And if people follow that link, they can get right to the sign-up page for our 7-module course right now. What is there is the free introduction, which is a nice discussion with the head of the Shift Network that Karen and I had to kind of elucidate where we'll be going with this course. But it'll be, I think, of great value to anyone who wants to bring healing, bring wholeness, bring kind of sense of meaning and purpose into their lives. So those are really kind of the main sources. Go to sacredacoustics.com to learn more about the meditative techniques. And just a few others while I'm listing websites for those interested in the science. Go to GalileoCommission.org, and that's a beautiful page. I'm one of the scientific advisors of that group, and it has more than 100 scientific advisors all about this revolution in consciousness studies. I would highly advise people to go there. As I've already mentioned, uvadops.org. But I hope people will join us on that Shift Network course, and certainly in the United in Hope and Healing every other week, Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, webinars. We have very interesting and exciting guests every time, and the replays are worth their weight in gold. So I encourage everybody to get there and listen to those replays at UnitedInHopeAndHealing.com. And this is really about bringing us all together, because ultimately we are all in this together. As NDEers will tell you, this world is bound together through love, kindness, compassion, mercy, acceptance. And as we come to realize that we're all really sharing the one mind, it becomes incumbent on us to treat others, as we would like to be treated, with great respect. The golden rule is written into the fabric of the universe. And that, I think, is one of the most important lessons for all of us to know. And that we can trust in this universe, and we are bound together through that beautiful force of loving kindness.
I love it. I love it. That's what you say in the movie too, which, by the way, you guys also, Dr. Alexander is in the movie. You have to watch it. I feel like also it's an entertaining way to see scientifically how these powers are possible. It's very empowering to begin to trust in yourself, like you were saying. And that is superhumanfilm.com. Actually, Superhuman Film just came out 3 weeks ago, so it's still very fresh, and it's, people can rent it, as well. So it's available everywhere. So we're going to leave all the links, all the information, so people can come back to it. And if you have any other questions, we'll get back to them as well as we review the comments. Dr. Alexander, thank you so much. That was
Caroline, thank you so much for having me. It's been great to be here. I'm sorry we didn't have more time to go into more detail, but
next time
we'll try and keep in touch with this Facebook page and see if we can provide some more answers.
Do you want to come back? Let's do it again.
All right, we should do that sometime.
Yeah. Say hi to Karen. Is she around?
She is around, and I will absolutely say hi to her.
All right. Hey, here you
there
are.
She is.
Sweetie.
Sorry.
It's very counterintuitive, but this is Karen as well. She's Dr. Alexander's partner, and we're doing all these programs together. So let's do it again next time.
All right, that'd be great. And she is my best half, so you all haven't even heard my best stuff yet. It's all right here.
And then we'll also maybe focus a lot on healing, because I really like that subject. Many people can benefit with that from that, especially with the COVID situation. So
that is true. Well, this is all about healing and the power of prayer. So I trust that your audience is well into all that and working with it.
Absolutely.
So I appreciate your having me on today.
Thank you so much, and take care of yourself, and we'll see you very, very soon.
All right, Caroline, thanks so much.
Yeah. Awesome. And you guys, thank you so much for joining. Hopefully, again, like I said, we will get back to your questions. Just keep them in the comments section. Thank you so much for joining me and Dr. Alexander today, and we'll see you again next time. Thank you.